Look at me. Breathe. Just stay with me, okay? His voice cut through the dark like it was the only solid thing left in the world, low and steady, like he wasn't trapped in a metal box suspended somewhere between floors, like he wasn't standing inches away from me while my lungs refused to cooperate and my heart tried to break out of my chest. I couldn't see much, just the faint emergency light flickering above us, casting everything in this dim, uneven glow, but I could feel everything. The air felt too tight, too warm, like it was pressing against my skin, and the walls, God, the walls, felt like they were inching closer every second. My fingers trembled against the brushed steel panel behind me, nails scraping softly as I tried to ground myself in something real, something solid, but even that felt like it was slipping. I can't. My voice came out thin, uneven, like it didn't belong to me. I can't breathe. Yeah, you can. He stepped closer, too close, until I could feel the heat of him, steady and real, cutting through the panic clawing up my spine. His hand closed gently but firmly around my wrist, thumb pressing just enough to anchor me. Not tight, not forceful, just there. You're breathing right now? In. Slow. His thumb shifted, a small, deliberate movement, like he was counting my pulse. And out. I tried. God, I tried. But the air still caught halfway, my chest tightening like something invisible had wrapped around it and refused to let go. My vision blurred at the edges, the dim light smearing into something softer, less real, and for a second, I thought I might actually pass out right there on the elevator floor. Hey. His voice dropped, softer this time, closer. Stay with me. Something about that, about the way he said it, cut through the noise in my head. Stay? Not calm down. Not get it together. Just stay. I focused on that instead of the walls, instead of the silence outside, instead of the awful realization that no one was coming anytime soon. His hand slid slightly, not letting go, just adjusting, grounding me again. Look at me. I did. Or at least I tried to. His face was mostly shadowed, but I could make out the shape of him. Sharp jaw, steady eyes locked on mine, completely unfazed in a way that didn't make sense. There. You go. He murmured, like I'd done something right just by not falling apart completely. In. I dragged in a breath. It stuttered, shaky, but it came. Out. I let it go, slower this time. The panic didn't disappear, but it loosened. Just a fraction, just enough for me to feel the difference. My shoulders sagged before I could stop them, the tension slipping out in pieces, and somehow, without thinking, I leaned forward a little. Not much. Just enough that I could feel him more clearly, steady and solid in a way the rest of the world suddenly wasn't. He didn't move away. Didn't even hesitate. His grip on my wrist stayed the same, firm, grounding, patient. See, he said quietly. You're okay. The words shouldn't have worked. They were too simple, too easy. But standing there, trapped in a stalled elevator somewhere between floors with a stranger who refused to let me spiral completely out of control, I almost believed him. And that was the part that scared me more than anything else. The silence that followed felt different, heavier somehow, like the world outside the elevator had completely disappeared and left just the two of us suspended in this strange, quiet bubble. My breathing steadied little by little, each inhale less jagged than the last, but I could still feel the echo of panic sitting low in my chest, waiting for the slightest excuse to come rushing back. His hand was still around my wrist, warm and firm, and I realized after a few seconds that he had not let go. Not even a little. I should have pulled away. I should have said something normal, something casual, like thanks or I am fine now, but instead I just stood there, too aware of everything. The faint hum of the emergency light, the soft rhythm of his breathing, the way the air felt warmer where he stood close to me. Better? He asked quietly, his voice no longer cutting through panic, but settling into something calmer, almost gentle. I nodded before I could think too hard about it. Yeah, I think so. My voice sounded steadier now, but it still felt fragile, like it could crack if I pushed it too far. He watched me for a second longer, like he was making sure I meant it. Then finally, slowly, his grip loosened. Not abrupt, not distant, just enough to let me stand on my own again. I did not realize how much I had been relying on that contact until it was gone. The space between us felt different immediately. Too open, too empty. I cleared my throat, shifting my weight awkwardly as I glanced around the elevator, as if the walls had somehow changed while I was not looking. They had not. Still the same narrow box. Still no signal on my phone. Still no sound from outside. So, I exhaled softly, running a hand through my hair, trying to gather my thoughts into something coherent. "We are really stuck, huh?" "Looks like it," he said, calm as ever, like being trapped for hours was just a minor inconvenience. He leaned back slightly against the wall, but not far. Not far enough to feel distant. "Maintenance probably will not even notice until morning." Morning. The word landed heavier than it should have. I let out a small, humorless laugh. "That is great. Just perfect." He glanced at me, and for the first time, there was something almost like amusement in his expression. Not mocking, just subtle. "You always react like this under pressure?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, then stopped, because honestly, I did not have a good answer for that. "No," I muttered. "Just when I am stuck in a metal box with a stranger who apparently handles it way too well." "Lucas," he said simply. I blinked. "What?" "My name," he clarified, tilting his head slightly. "Figured stranger might get old if we are here all night." There was something about the way he said it, casual but intentional, that made the space feel smaller again, but not in a suffocating way this time. More personal. "Ethan," I replied after a beat, the name leaving my mouth before I could overthink it. He nodded once, like he had just confirmed something important. "Okay, Ethan." The way he said my name, slow, deliberate, sent a strange, quiet ripple through my chest that had nothing to do with panic. I looked away quickly, pretending to study the elevator buttons again, but I could still feel his attention, steady and unhurried, like he was not going anywhere. And for the first time since the lights went out, the silence did not feel quite as suffocating as it had before. Time stretched in a strange way after that, like the minutes were longer inside the elevator than they should have been anywhere else. I shifted again, leaning my shoulder lightly against the wall, trying to act like I was completely fine now, like my earlier panic had been a one-time thing and not something that could come rushing back at any second. My phone screen glowed faintly in my hand as I checked it again out of habit, even though I already knew what it would say. No signal. No service. Nothing. Still nothing. Lucas asked, his voice calm but not distant, like he was paying attention without making it obvious. I shook my head, letting out a small sigh. 0 bars. "It is like we disappeared." He hummed softly, glancing up toward the ceiling as if that might somehow help. "Emergency systems should have alerted someone. It just might take a while." "A while," I repeated, pressing my lips together. "That is a very vague amount of time." "A few hours," he said, then after a beat. "Maybe until morning." There it was again. Morning. The words settled heavier this time, not sharp like panic, but slow and sinking, like a realization I could not quite ignore. I pushed off the wall, pacing the small space without really meaning to, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, like that would somehow make the situation feel less trapped. The elevator floor creaked faintly under my shoes, the sound too loud in the quiet. "You are pacing," Lucas observed. "I am aware," I muttered, running a hand over the back of my neck. "It helps. Kind of." He watched me for a moment, his gaze steady, then said, "You are going to make yourself anxious again." I stopped mid-step, exhaling slowly. "I am trying not to." The truth hung there between us, simple and a little too honest. He pushed off the wall then, closing some of the distance I had created without even realizing it. Not all of it. Just enough that I could feel his presence again, steady and grounding, like before. "Then do not fight it like that," he said quietly. "Sit down." I blinked at him. "On the floor." "It is not going to get any cleaner if you wait," he replied, a faint hint of dry humor slipping through. I hesitated for half a second, then let out a soft breath and slid down the wall. Anyway, folding myself onto the floor with my back against the cool metal. It was not comfortable, but it was stable. Less movement. Less spiraling. Lucas followed a moment later, lowering himself beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost brushed, but not quite touching. The space between us felt intentional. Careful. I stared straight ahead, focusing on the faint reflection of the emergency light on the opposite wall, trying to keep my thoughts from racing too far ahead. "You do this a lot?" I asked after a moment, my voice quieter now. "Handle things like this." He tilted his head slightly. "Get stuck in elevators?" I huffed out a small breath that might have been a laugh. "No." The calm part. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Someone has to be, he said finally. Panic does not fix anything. I glanced at him then, really looked this time. Even in the dim light, there was something steady about him, something that did not waver even in a situation like this. It was reassuring, more than I wanted to admit. Yeah, I murmured, looking away again. Well, good thing you are here then. The words slipped out before I could filter them, soft and a little too real. I felt it immediately, the shift in the air, subtle but there. Lucas did not respond right away, but I could feel his gaze on me, warm and unreadable. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different. Not empty, not suffocating, just full. And somewhere in the quiet, without thinking, my shoulder leaned just slightly toward his, closing that careful gap between us by the smallest fraction. The contact was so slight it should not have mattered, just the faint brush of my shoulder against his. But the moment it happened, I felt it. Not sharp like panic. Not overwhelming. Just there. Solid. Real. I froze for half a second, my breath catching again. But this time it was not because the walls felt too close. It was because suddenly I was very aware of him in a completely different way. Lucas did not pull away. If anything, he adjusted just enough that the contact stayed, subtle and unspoken, like he had decided it was fine, and that was the end of it. My fingers curled loosely against my knee, grounding myself in something small while my thoughts tried to settle into a new rhythm. You are thinking too hard again, he said quietly. I let out a soft exhale, almost a laugh. Is it that obvious? A little, he replied. There was a pause. Then his shoulders shifted slightly, not breaking contact, just easing into it. Your breathing changes. That made me glance at him again. You can tell that? Yeah. He did not sound proud of it. Just certain. I shook my head lightly, looking forward again. That is kind of impressive. Or a little unsettling. You can decide which one later, he said, and I could hear the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. The silence that followed stretched out again, but it was not empty. It was filled with small things now. The quiet hum of the elevator system trying and failing to reset. The soft sound of fabric shifting when one of us moved even slightly. The steady rhythm of two people breathing in a space too small to ignore each other. My head tipped back against the wall, eyes closing for just a second as I tried to relax into that rhythm instead of fighting it. The metal was cool against my skin, grounding in a different way than his warmth at my side. You ever think about how weird this is? I asked after a moment, my voice softer now, less sharp around the edges. Being stuck with someone you just met. Lucas was quiet for a beat. Weirder things have happened. I huffed lightly. That is not a real answer. It is the only one I have, he said. I turned my head slightly, studying him again in the dim light. You are very calm about all of this. You said that already. I am saying it again. I replied, a little more firmly this time. Because most people would be at least a little freaked out. He did not answer right away, and for a second I wondered if I had pushed too far. But then he said, quieter than before, I do not like small spaces either. I blinked, caught off guard. Wait, seriously? He nodded once, minimal but certain. Yeah. That did not make sense. Then how are you this calm? Another pause, longer this time. Then, because you were not. The words landed softly, but they hit deeper than I expected. I looked at him. Really looked, trying to read something in his expression, but he was already looking forward again, like he had not just said something that shifted the entire weight of the moment. My chest tightened slightly, but not in a bad way. Just full. That is, I started, then stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence without making it sound bigger than it was supposed to be. Or maybe it already was. He did not press me to finish. He just stayed there, shoulder against mine, steady and warm, like that was enough. And after a moment, without thinking, I let my head tilt just slightly to the side, closer to him, not quite resting, just near enough to feel the quiet reassurance of his presence in the dim, enclosed space. The closeness lingered in a way I could not ignore anymore, not sharp or overwhelming, just steady, like a quiet hum under everything else, and for the first time since we got stuck, my body did not feel like it was bracing for something bad to happen. It felt tired. I let out a slow breath, my head still tilted slightly toward him, not quite resting, just hovering in that space where I could feel the warmth coming off him, subtle but constant. You ever think this is kind of insane? I murmured, my voice softer now, almost lazy with the way it slipped out. Like, a few hours ago, I did not even know you existed. Lucas shifted slightly beside me. The movement small, but enough that our shoulders pressed a little more firmly together before settling again. And now you are stuck with me overnight, he said. Could be worse. I let out a quiet huff that almost turned into a laugh. That is your idea of reassuring? It is honest, he replied. I turned my head just enough to glance at him, catching the outline of his expression in the dim light. Calm as always, but there was something else there now, something softer around the edges that had not been there before. Or maybe I just had not noticed it earlier. You are weirdly okay with this, I said again. But this time it did not sound like an accusation. More like curiosity. He shrugged slightly, the motion brushing against me again. You are calmer now. That simple statement settled over me in a way I was not expecting. I looked down at my hands, resting loosely in my lap, no longer shaking, no longer clenched. He was right. Somehow, somewhere between the panic and the quiet and the steady presence beside me, I had stopped feeling like I was about to lose control. Yeah, I admitted quietly. I guess I am. The elevator gave a faint, almost imperceptible creak, like it was reminding us where we were, and for a second my chest tightened again, that old instinct trying to crawl back up. My fingers twitched slightly, but before it could spiral, I felt it again, his shoulder pressing just a little more into mine, grounding without making a big deal out of it. Still here, he said, so quietly I almost missed it. The words were simple, but they anchored something in me instantly. I exhaled slowly, letting that tension fade before it could grow. Yeah, I echoed softer this time. Still here. Time blurred after that. The kind of slow, quiet stretch where nothing big happened, but everything still felt like it mattered. My head tipped back again, resting more fully against the wall this time. My eyes drifting closed for a moment as the exhaustion I had been ignoring started to settle in. It made sense, I told myself. Adrenaline crashing. Too much stress. Too little space to move. But even as my body relaxed, I stayed aware of him, of the steady presence at my side, of the quiet rhythm of his breathing that I had somehow synced mine to without realizing it. You should try to rest, Lucas said after a while, his voice low, like he did not want to break whatever this calm was. I let out a soft breath, barely opening my eyes. In an elevator? It is not ideal, he admitted. But it is better than staying tense all night. I considered that for a second, then let my head tilt slightly again, closer this time, until the side of my temple brushed lightly against his shoulder. The contact was tentative at first, like I was giving him a chance to pull away if he wanted to. He did not. He stayed exactly where he was, steady and unmoving, like he had already decided. My breath slowed again, deeper now, more even, and before I could overthink it, before I could second-guess the way this felt, I let myself relax just a little more into that space, into that quiet, into him. And somewhere in the dim light, with the world still paused outside those metal walls, the idea of not being alone in this no longer felt like something to fight against. At some point, without realizing exactly when it happened, the tension in my body slipped further than I expected, my muscles loosening in a slow, reluctant surrender to exhaustion, and the steady warmth at my side became something I stopped questioning and started relying on. My temple rested more fully against Lucas's shoulder now, the contact no longer tentative, no longer something I was testing, but something I had quietly accepted. His breathing stayed even, unhurried, and after a while, mine matched it without effort, like my body had decided this was the rhythm to follow. The elevator remained still, the faint hum of the emergency light the only reminder that we were not completely cut off from the world, but it felt distant now, like background noise instead of a threat. You still awake? I murmured after a while, my voice low and a little rough from the quiet. Yeah, he replied just as softly. I shifted slightly, not pulling away, just adjusting so I could be more comfortable, my shoulder pressing a little more firmly into his side. You have not moved at all, I said, a hint of disbelief slipping through. You are going to go numb or something. I felt the subtle movement of his head turning just slightly toward me. I will survive. I huffed a faint breath that almost turned into a smile, my eyes still closed. That is a bold assumption. There was a brief pause. Then, you are finally joking again. The observation made something in my chest warm in a way that had nothing to do with proximity. Do not get used to it. I muttered, but there was no real weight behind it. Silence settled again, softer this time, more natural, like we had found a way to exist in it without it pressing in on us. My hand shifted slightly against the floor, fingers brushing lightly against the side of his, the contact accidental at first, but neither of us pulled away. It stayed there, subtle and quiet, like everything else between us. I became aware of it slowly, the faint warmth where our hands almost touched, the way the space felt smaller but not suffocating anymore. Just close. Ethan, Lucas said after a while, his voice lower now, closer than before. I hummed softly in response, too relaxed to fully open my eyes. If you start to feel that panic again, he continued, tell me before it gets bad. The words were simple, but there was something in the way he said them that made them feel more like a promise than a suggestion. I swallowed lightly, my throat suddenly a little tight for reasons I could not fully explain. Okay, I said quietly. Another pause. Then, softer, you are really good at that, you know. At what? Making it feel less awful. I admitted, the words coming out slower, more honest than I intended. I felt the slight shift of his shoulder under my head, not moving away, just adjusting again, like he was making sure I stayed comfortable. You are doing most of the work, he said. I shook my head faintly against him. No, I am just not freaking out anymore. That counts, he replied. My lips curved slightly, a small, tired smile that no one could see in the dim light. The quiet stretched again, but this time it carried something else with it, something softer, something that settled deeper the longer we stayed like this. My breathing slowed further, heavier now, sleep starting to edge in around the corners of my awareness. I tried to stay awake, some small part of me resisting the idea of letting my guard down completely in a situation like this, but it was getting harder to hold on to that resistance. The warmth at my side, the steady presence, the way everything had shifted from panic to something quieter, something safer. It all pulled at me in a way I could not ignore. You can sleep, Lucas said quietly, almost like he could feel that hesitation. I am not going anywhere. The words settled over me, simple and certain, and before I could question them, before I could second-guess why they mattered as much as they did, my body finally gave in to the exhaustion I had been holding back. My grip on awareness loosened, my breathing deepened, and the last thing I registered before everything faded into something softer was the steady warmth beside me, constant and unmoving, like something I could trust without fully understanding why. I woke up slowly, like my body did not quite remember where it was yet, my thoughts still heavy and blurred at the edges, but the first thing I noticed was the warmth. Not the stale warmth of the elevator air, not the faint hum of the emergency light overhead, but something steady and close and real. My cheek was pressed against something solid, and for a second, my brain tried to make sense of it, to place it somewhere familiar, but then it clicked all at once. Lucas. The memory came back in pieces, slow and soft, like I was easing into it instead of being thrown back into it. The elevator. The panic. His voice. The way everything had gradually shifted from suffocating to this. I blinked my eyes open, the dim light still the same, still flickering faintly above us, unchanged. For a moment, I stayed completely still, just taking it in. My head was resting fully against his shoulder now, not hovering, not tentative, but settled there like it had found its place at some point while I was asleep. My body was angled slightly toward him, closer than I remembered being before, and my breath caught slightly. My hand was resting lightly against his, fingers barely touching but not pulled away. I froze for a second, that familiar spark of awareness flickering back to life, but it did not come with panic this time. Just a quiet, steady realization. He had not moved. Not enough to disturb me. Not enough to pull away. My gaze shifted slightly, just enough to look at him without lifting my head. His eyes were open, awake, watching me, not in a way that felt intrusive or sharp, just present, like he had been like this for a while. You are awake, he said quietly, his voice low enough that it barely broke the silence around us. I swallowed lightly, my throat still a little dry from sleep. Yeah. My voice came out softer than usual, still wrapped in that lingering drowsiness. I hesitated, then added, how long was I out? A while, he replied. Maybe a couple hours. A couple hours. The thought settled slowly, and with it came another realization. He had stayed exactly like this the entire time. My chest tightened just slightly, not uncomfortable, just aware. You did not wake me up, I said, more a statement than a question. You needed it, he answered simply. I shifted slightly then, testing the space, but I did not pull away completely. My head lifted just enough to ease the pressure, but I stayed close, closer than I normally would have with someone I barely knew. What about you? I asked, glancing at him more directly now. Did you sleep at all? He shook his head once. Not really. Something about that did not sit right with me. Lucas. I started, then paused, unsure how to phrase what I was thinking without making it sound bigger than it needed to be. You should have woken me up. We could have switched or something. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady. You were comfortable. The words were simple, but they landed heavier than they should have. I looked at him for a second longer than necessary, trying to read something more in his expression, but as usual, he was calm, unreadable in a way that was starting to feel familiar. Still, I muttered softly, shifting my hand slightly, but not completely pulling it away. You cannot just stay awake all night because of me. I can, he said, just as quietly. I exhaled slowly, not sure how to respond to that, not sure why it mattered as much as it suddenly did. The elevator remained still around us, unchanged, but something between us had shifted again while I slept, something subtle but impossible to ignore. And as I sat there, still close, still not fully pulling away, I realized that the idea of moving too far from him now felt wrong in a way I could not quite explain. The quiet after that stretched in a way that felt almost fragile, like any sudden movement or careless word might break whatever had settled between us while I slept. I shifted slightly, more aware of the contact now, of how close I still was, of how neither of us had fully moved away. My hand rested near his, fingers brushing lightly every time I adjusted even a little, and each small touch sent a faint ripple of awareness through me that I could not quite ignore anymore. You are staring, I said softly, glancing at him again, my voice carrying a hint of something uncertain that I did not bother hiding. Lucas did not look away. You look different when you are not panicking. I blinked, caught off guard by how direct that was. Different how? He studied me for a second, like he was actually considering the question instead of brushing it off. Quieter, he said finally. Less guarded. The words landed somewhere deeper than I expected, and for a moment I did not know how to respond. I let out a small breath instead, looking down at my hands again, at the way my fingers had unconsciously inched closer to his. That is because I am not trying to survive a meltdown right now, I muttered lightly, but there was no real bite in it. That helps, he replied, just as evenly. I shook my head a little, a faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth before I could stop it. You are impossible to argue with. I am not arguing, he said. I am observing. I let that sit for a second, then leaned my head back against the wall again, though I did not move far from him. Not far enough to lose that steady sense of presence that had somehow become important without me realizing when it happened. The elevator creaked faintly again, a small, mechanical sound that echoed in the enclosed space, and my chest tightened just slightly in response, the memory of earlier panic brushing against the edges of my thoughts. It was not overwhelming this time, but it was there, subtle, lingering. Lucas noticed immediately. He did not say anything at first. He just shifted, barely, his shoulder pressing a little more firmly against mine again, grounding in that same quiet way he had before. The tension eased almost instantly. I exhaled slowly, my eyes closing for a brief second as I let that feeling pass without fighting it. You really do that without thinking, do you? I murmured. Do what? That? I said, nodding slightly toward where our shoulders touched. The whole, making things feel less terrible thing. There was a pause, then, maybe. I let out a soft breath, opening my eyes again. It works. He did not respond to that, but I felt the slight shift in the air, like he had heard it, like it mattered even if he did not say anything out loud. My fingers moved again, almost absent-mindedly, brushing more fully against his. This time, not just a passing contact, but something that lingered a second longer than before. I did not pull away. Neither did he. The quiet stretched again, but it was different now, filled with something warmer, something that settled deeper the longer we stayed like this. I turned my head slightly, looking at him again, studying the way he sat there, steady and composed even after hours of being stuck in the same small space. You are not as calm as you pretend to be, are you? I asked quietly. He raised an eyebrow, just slightly. What makes you say that? I hesitated, then shrugged faintly. You said you do not like small spaces. His gaze held mine for a moment longer this time, something unreadable flickering there before it settled again. I do not, he admitted. I tilted my head a little, studying him more closely now. Then why are you still so calm? He did not answer right away, and for a second, the silence felt heavier again, like it was carrying something just beneath the surface. Then, quietly, because you are still here. The words were simple, but they landed with a weight that made my chest tighten in a completely different way than before, something softer, something I was not entirely prepared for. I looked at him, really looked this time, and for a second, the elevator, the situation, everything else faded just slightly into the background. And the strange part was, I did not feel trapped anymore. The words lingered between us longer than anything else that night, quiet but impossible to ignore, settling somewhere deep in my chest where I was not used to feeling things this quickly, this clearly. Because you are still here. I let out a slow breath, my fingers shifting slightly where they rested against his, not pulling away, just adjusting, like I needed to confirm the contact was still real. It was warm, steady, unmoving. That is a lot to put on someone you just met, I said softly, though there was no real resistance behind it. Lucas did not look away. I am not putting anything on you. You kind of are, I murmured, glancing at him, trying to keep the tone light even though something inside me felt anything but. That sounds like responsibility. It is not, he said. It is just fact. The way he said it, calm, certain, like there was no room for doubt, made it harder to brush off than I wanted it to be. I swallowed lightly, my gaze drifting down again, watching the subtle movement of our hands as my fingers shifted once more, this time settling a little more deliberately against his. The contact was still soft, still restrained, but it was no longer accidental. He did not move away. If anything, his fingers adjusted slightly too, just enough to meet mine without making it obvious. The elevator creaked again, a faint shudder running through the metal around us, and instinctively, my body tensed just a fraction, the memory of being trapped trying to surface again. But before it could take hold, before the spiral could start, I felt it. His hand. Not grabbing, not pulling, just turning slightly so that our fingers aligned more naturally. The contact firmer now, intentional in a quiet, steady way. Still here, he said again, just as softly as before. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding, the tension easing almost immediately. Yeah, I replied, my voice quieter now, something softer threading through it. Still here. The words felt different this time. Not just reassurance. Something closer to agreement. I leaned back slightly, my head resting more comfortably against the wall again, but I did not move away from him. If anything, I shifted closer, just enough that our shoulders pressed more fully together, the contact no longer tentative or uncertain. It felt natural now, like it had slowly become the default without either of us deciding it out loud. You know, I said after a moment, my voice quieter, more thoughtful. This is probably the strangest night of my life. Lucas let out a faint breath that might have been a quiet laugh. Probably. I turned my head slightly toward him, raising an eyebrow. Okay, definitely. No competition. Good, he said. Would not want to be second place. I huffed softly, shaking my head. You are unbelievable. You are still here. He repeated, like that answered everything. I felt quiet again after that. Not because I did not have anything to say, but because the moment felt too full to interrupt with something unnecessary. The space between us, once suffocating, now felt steady, grounded. The kind of quiet that did not need to be filled. My thumb shifted slightly, brushing against his without thinking, a small, absent-minded movement that I did not pull back from. He did not react outwardly, but I felt the subtle change in the way his hand rested against mine, more certain now, like he had noticed and chosen not to let it go. Time moved slowly, but it no longer felt like something to endure. It felt like something unfolding, piece by piece, in the quiet, in the stillness, in the space where two strangers were no longer entirely strangers. And as I sat there, shoulder pressed against his, fingers resting against his like it was the most natural thing in the world, I realized something that caught me off guard. I was not thinking about getting out anymore. Not right away. Not urgently. Because for the first time since the elevator had stopped, Being here did not feel like something I needed to escape from. It felt like something I was not quite ready to lose. The longer we sat there, the more the world outside the elevator felt like something distant, something that belonged to another version of the night. One where I was just another person rushing through a normal day without thinking twice about who I might run into or what might happen next. That version of me felt far away now, replaced by someone who was sitting on the floor of a stalled elevator at what had to be well past midnight, shoulder pressed against a man I had met only hours ago, fingers resting against his like it had quietly become something I did not want to lose. I let out a slow breath, my gaze drifting toward the closed doors again, the faint seam between them barely visible in the dim light. "Do you think they forgot about us?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Lucas shifted slightly beside me, not pulling away, just enough to ease his posture. "No," he said, "but it is late. Fewer people around. It takes time." Time. I repeated softly, rolling the word over in my head. It did not sound as heavy as it had earlier. Not suffocating. Just uncertain. I leaned my head back again, eyes flickering closed for a second, listening to the quiet around us. "We are going to walk out of here eventually," I said, more to myself than to him. "And then what?" The question hung there, unexpected and a little too honest. I opened my eyes again, staring straight ahead, suddenly aware of how strange that sounded out loud. "That is a good question," Lucas replied after a moment, his voice calm but quieter than before. I turned my head slightly, studying him again, trying to read something in his expression. "You do not seem like the kind of person who just forgets something like this," I said carefully. He met my gaze, steady as always. "Do you?" I hesitated, then shook my head faintly. "No." The answer came easier than I expected. Because it was true. There was no way I was going to walk out of this elevator and pretend this night had not happened. Not after everything. Not after the way things had shifted so quietly, but so completely. My fingers moved again, more deliberate this time, sliding just enough to rest more securely against his. Not quite interlacing, but close. He responded without hesitation, his hand adjusting to match the contact, steady and certain. The small movement sent a quiet ripple through me, something warm and unfamiliar that settled deeper the longer it stayed. "Good," he said simply. The word was soft, but it carried weight, like it mattered more than it should have. The elevator gave another faint sound, a distant mechanical click this time, and both of us stilled slightly, listening. My breath caught for a second, not from panic, but from anticipation. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Lucas nodded once, his posture shifting just slightly, more alert now. "Yeah." We waited. 1 second. 2. Then a faint vibration ran through the walls, subtle but unmistakable, like the system was finally trying to come back to life. My heart picked up, not racing like before, but steady and expectant. "I think," I started, then stopped as another sound followed, louder this time, something moving beyond the doors. Footsteps. Voices. Distant but real. I felt my chest tighten again, but this time it was not from fear. It was something else entirely. Something closer to reluctance. My hand tightened slightly against his before I could stop myself, the contact instinctive. Lucas did not pull away. If anything, his grip steadied just a fraction more in response. "They found us," I said quietly, though the words felt strange in my mouth. He did not answer right away. And in that brief pause, with the sound of the outside world getting closer, with the reality of leaving this space becoming inevitable, I realized something I had not been ready to admit before. I was not sure I wanted this moment to end just yet. The voices outside grew clearer, closer, layered with the metallic clank of tools and the low hum of something being adjusted beyond the elevator doors, and every sound felt like a countdown, like each second was pulling us closer to the moment this strange, suspended night would finally end. I stayed still, my hand still resting against Lucas's, my shoulder pressed to his, as if moving too soon might break something I was not ready to let go of yet. "Hello? Anyone inside?" A voice called from the other side, slightly muffled but unmistakably real. My breath caught for a second, and I instinctively looked toward the doors, my heart tightening in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not fear. Not panic. Something heavier. "Yeah," I called back, my voice steady but quieter than usual. "We are here." "Hang tight," the voice replied. "We are getting you out." Hang tight. I almost laughed at that. As if we had been doing anything else for hours. As if holding on had not quietly become the only thing keeping everything together. The elevator gave a faint jolt, not enough to alarm, just enough to remind us that the world outside was finally reaching in. I felt my fingers tighten slightly against Lucas's without meaning to, the contact instinctive, like I was anchoring myself one last time. He did not pull away. He never had. Instead, his hand adjusted just enough to meet mine more firmly, steady and certain, like he understood without me having to say anything. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice closer now, drawing my attention back to him. I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze, and for a second, everything else faded again. The noise, the movement, the approaching end of this moment. "We are getting out," I said, though it came out more like a question than a statement. "Yeah," he replied. There was something in his expression, something calm but deeper than before, like he was already thinking about what came next. Or maybe what did not. The metal doors shifted slightly, a narrow line of light beginning to break through the scene between them, thin at first, then growing brighter as someone worked from the outside. The sudden contrast made me blink, my eyes adjusting to the change after hours in dim, flickering light. "Almost there," the voice outside called again. I swallowed lightly, my chest tightening again, but this time I knew exactly why. Because this was it. The moment everything changed back. Or forward. I was not sure which one felt more accurate. My hand moved slightly, more deliberate this time, my fingers curling just enough to hold on to his for a second longer. Not tight. Not desperate. Just intentional. He responded immediately, his grip steady, grounding, like he had been waiting for that shift. "Ethan," he said, and the way he said my name made something in my chest pull tight in a completely different way. I looked at him fully now, not glancing, not half looking, but really seeing him in the growing light. "Yeah." He held my gaze, steady and unwavering. "Do not disappear after this." The words were quiet, but they hit harder than anything else he had said all night. For a second, I could not respond, my thoughts catching on the weight of it, on the way it mirrored something I had not even realized I was thinking. "I was not planning to," I said finally, my voice softer than I expected. The corner of his mouth shifted slightly, not quite a smile, but something close. "Good." The doors jerked again, opening wider this time, the bright hallway lights spilling in fully now, washing over the small space we had been in, breaking the cocoon that had formed around us. The outside world was back. Real. Loud. Moving. I felt the shift immediately, the air changing, the space no longer just ours. But even as the moment broke open, even as the reality of leaving settled in, I did not let go right away. And neither did he. The light from the hallway spilled fully into the elevator now, bright and almost too sharp after hours in the dim glow, and for a moment I had to squint, my eyes adjusting as the outside world rushed back in all at once. Voices layered over each other, footsteps echoing against the floor, the distant hum of the building waking up around us, and it all felt too loud, too fast, compared to the quiet space we had been wrapped in. "All right, you are good to come out," someone said from just beyond the doors, stepping back to give us room. I did not move right away. I felt it the second before it happened, that shift, that subtle break in the moment as reality pushed in between us, reminding me that this was temporary, that whatever had formed here did not automatically follow us outside. My fingers were still curled lightly against Lucas's, the contact steady, familiar now, and for a second longer, neither of us let go. Then, slowly, I exhaled and eased my hand away. The absence was immediate, noticeable, like something quiet had been turned off. I pushed myself up from the floor, my legs a little stiff from sitting so long, brushing my hands against my jeans in a small, absent motion as I stood. The elevator suddenly felt smaller in a different way, not intimate anymore, just cramped and ordinary under the bright light. Lucas stood beside me a second later, just as steady as he had been all night, his presence still close, still grounding, even without the constant contact. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, even though the answer felt more complicated than that. "Yeah," I said, my voice a little softer than usual. "I am good." He studied me for a second, like he was checking for something beneath the surface, then gave a small nod. We stepped forward together, crossing that threshold at the same time, moving out into the hallway where a couple of maintenance workers stood off to the side, tools in hand, expressions a mix of relief and mild curiosity. "You guys were in there all night?" one of them asked. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a small smile. "Something like that." They nodded, already turning their attention back to the open panel beside the elevator, talking quietly among themselves about repairs and timing. And just like that, we were no longer the center of anything. Just two people stepping back into a normal night that had already started to move on without us. I took a few steps forward, then stopped without meaning to, the motion catching halfway as something pulled at me, subtle but impossible to ignore. I turned back. Lucas was right behind me, close enough that the space between us still felt familiar. Even out here, the hallway lights were brighter, clearer, and for the first time, I could really see him properly, not just outlines and shadows. He looked the same, but also not. Or maybe I was the one who had changed. So, I started, then stopped, the word feeling too small for everything I was trying to say. He watched me, waiting, not rushing, not filling the silence like most people would. So, I tried again, a little steadier this time. "This is where we just go back to normal, right?" The question felt wrong even as I said it. Like I already knew the answer was not that simple. Lucas did not answer right away. His gaze stayed on me, steady, searching in a way that made my chest tighten again, but not from panic. Something deeper. "Is that what you want?" he asked finally. The question caught me off guard, not because it was complicated, but because it was not. I opened my mouth to answer, then paused, realizing I had no idea what normal even meant anymore after everything that had happened between us in that small, enclosed space. I looked at him, really looked, and for a second, the noise of the hallway faded just slightly again. "No," I said quietly. And this time, there was no hesitation at all. The word hung between us, quiet but undeniable, cutting through the noise of the hallway like it had its own gravity, and for a second, everything else seemed to slow just enough for me to feel it fully. "No, not normal. Not after this." Lucas did not react right away, but I saw it in the way his gaze shifted slightly, sharper now, more focused, like something had just clicked into place. "Okay," he said finally, and the simplicity of it made my chest tighten in a way I could not quite explain. Not confusion, not uncertainty, something steadier. I let out a slow breath, the tension I had not realized I was holding easing just a fraction. "Okay," I echoed, a faint, almost disbelieving smile pulling at the corner of my mouth. "That is it. That is it," he replied, just as calm, but there was something else there now, something quieter but stronger than before. I shook my head slightly, a soft exhale escaping me. "You are really not going to make this complicated, are you?" "It does not have to be," he said. I looked at him for a second longer, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that might make this feel less real, but there was nothing. Just that same steady certainty that had been there all night. And somehow, that made it easier to believe. The hallway noise started to creep back in around us, footsteps passing, voices carrying, the normal rhythm of the building reasserting itself, but it no longer felt like it was pulling me away. If anything, it felt like background again, something distant compared to what was right in front of me. "So what happens now?" I asked, quieter this time, not because I was unsure, but because the moment felt like it deserved that softness. Lucas glanced down briefly, then back at me, like he was considering his answer even though it came naturally. "Now," he said, "we do not pretend this did not happen." My chest tightened again, but this time it came with something warmer, something that settled deeper instead of pulling tight. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, that sounds right." There was a brief pause, not awkward, just full, like we were both standing at the edge of something new without rushing to define it too quickly. Then, without overthinking it, without letting myself hesitate the way I normally would, I stepped a little closer, closing that last bit of distance between us again. Not touching, not yet, just close enough that it felt familiar, like the space we had shared inside the elevator had followed us out here after all. Lucas did not move back. He never had. His gaze stayed on mine, steady, grounding in the same quiet way it always had. "You said not to disappear," I murmured. "I meant it." "Good," he replied softly. The words settled between us, simple but solid, like a promise that did not need to be dressed up in anything more complicated. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, Then let my hand move again, not accidental this time, not uncertain, but deliberate as I reached out just enough for my fingers to brush lightly against his once more. He responded immediately, his hand shifting to meet mine in that same steady, certain way that had carried me through the night. The contact felt different out here, not hidden in shadows or softened by dim light, but real and clear under the bright hallway lights. And somehow, that made it feel even more certain. I let out a small breath, something easing fully for the first time since all of this started. I guess, I said quietly, I am not sleeping alone tonight either. The words slipped out before I could second-guess them, but the moment they landed, I knew I did not want to take them back. Lucas's expression shifted just slightly, something warmer, something that almost resembled a smile. No, he said, his voice low but certain. You are not. And standing there, no longer trapped, no longer forced into proximity, but choosing it anyway, I realized something simple and undeniable. This was not the end of anything. It was the beginning.